This is part 3 of the exodus of Jews from Arab countries. Egypt had 80 to 90,000 Jews, mostly concentrated in Cairo, which you see at the bottom of the map, or in Alexandria, which is in the northwest. After the Suez Canal opened in 1869, and there was a British protectorate in 1882, there was increased economic prosperity in Egypt. Jews came to Egypt from countries of the Mediterranean basin, along with others such as Greeks, Italians, and Armenians. Jews were well placed to take advantage of the booming economy because many went to AIU schools from 1868 and other secular schools. Here in the lower left, you see students of the Lycée François. And French was actually more common than Arabic for the Jews of Egypt. Only the poorer Jews in the Jewish quarter, or Harat al-Yahud in Cairo, mainly spoke Arabic. And here is a French Jewish newspaper. Next. Here you see a commercial street which had multiple Jewish shops. Jews actually owned most of the department stores in Egypt. They were prominent as stockbrokers, and here you see the stock certificate. They were also involved in other industries such as sugar, railroads, and real estate. And many Jews were in the middle or upper class. Next. Here you see a society wedding at the Nevi Daniel Synagogue in Alexandria. And here, carefree boys visiting the Sphinx and pyramids outside of Cairo. Next. They were even in the government. Yusuf Kitawi was finance minister. Egypt had become nominally independent from Britain in 1922. They were even Jewish Egyptian movie stars. Here is Camellia. Her AKA was Lillian Cohen. It didn't hurt her career that she was the mistress of King Farouk, who became king in 1936. But like other countries, things worsened in the 1930s. Hassan Banna, who was the founder of the Muslim Brotherhood in 1928, was anti-Zionist and anti-Jew. And especially after the 1936 to 1939 Arab revolt in Palestine, there was increased tensions between Jews and Muslims. Here in the center, you see papers from a propaganda campaign just before the anniversary of the Balfour Declaration, and there were riots November 2nd to 3rd in Cairo, also against other minorities. There was a policy of Egyptianization, including the company law of 1947, where all companies had to maintain a staff of 75% Egyptian nationals. For Jews, this was a problem. Only 5,000 actually had Egyptian citizenship. 40,000 were stateless, many of them poor who could not afford the fee. And about 50,000 had foreign passports. During the Israeli War of Independence, approximately 13,000 Jews were arrested and their property taken. However, most of it was returned. But after the war, 20,000 Jews left Egypt. About 16,000 came to Israel. After the officers' coup, in 1952, when King Farouk was overthrown, things improved for a short while. Here, their leader, General Naguib, was visiting the Cairo synagogue in 1952. But in 1954, the hardliner Gamal Nasser came to power. In late October to early November, there was the Suez War, where Israel, France, and Great Britain were involved. After the Suez War, Jews were regarded as a fifth column, and there was a systemic policy of ridding the country of Jews by humiliation, intimidation, and harassment. Also, this applied to other minorities like the Greeks and Armenians. Many Jews were given only 2 days' notice for an eviction notice, as you see here on the left. They were only allowed to take one bag and $20 out of the country, and then their property was confiscated. And here you see a refugee certificate. Between 1956 and 1958, 25,000 more Jews left Egypt. And here you see some Jewish refugees on ship just entering Haifa Harbor. Next. A great deal, almost all of their property was eventually nationalized. Here you see on the left the Circular department store in Cairo, nationalized. Here on the right you see the Smuha Sporting Club in Alexandria. This whole area was developed by the Smuha family. It was sort of like the villages that you see in Florida. On the bottom was the Jewish villa, which was confiscated, and it's now the Algerian embassy in Cairo. The Jewish population continued to shrink, and by the Six-Day War, only 2,500 were left. Many left after that. Now there are only very, very few old people living in Cairo. Tunisia had 105,000 Jews, about 2.3% of the population. Tunis, the capital, is in the upper right of the map. Just to remember, the island of Jerba is near the bottom of the country, the Mediterranean. Here also you see the Hara, or the Jewish quarter of Tunisia, also approximately 25% Jewish. Many of the Jews were still in traditional garb. Next. But because of the French influence on Tunisia, it became a French protectorate in 1882. Many Jews went to AIU and other schools and to learn French. Their main language became French for many. Here you see a Jewish rally for community elections. They would go to cafes, like in France. This one is called La Golette. Next. During World War II, like other French possessions, in October 1940, the Vichy government in France passed laws establishing numerous clauses or limitations on education, economic restrictions, confiscations of property, and fines. In November 1942 to May 1943, 250,000 Germans occupied the country. And Tunisia was the only country where Jews had to wear a yellow star. Their fate would have been that of Europe, except the Germans had no time and not enough shipping. Approximately 2,000 Jews were recruited for forced labor camps near the front lines. Others died from Allied bombing. After the war, Zionism increased. It was stronger before the war than any other Arab country. There were Zionist groups in actually the 1920s. From 1948 to 1956, approximately 25,000 Jews left the country. Most to Israel, the others to France. And this was especially in 1955 to 1956, right before independence. Initially, the new government was friendly in 1956 to the Jews. Yom Kippur was a national holiday. He was actually a Jewish minister in 1957. But then in 1957, thanks to what they said was urban renewal, the cemetery in Tunis was destroyed. In 1961 was the Bizet affair. The French lost their last military base. 30,000 Jews left the country, mostly to France. They found that then there was no European backup for them. In 1967, after the Six-Day War, the Great Synagogue in Tunis was burned, and another 18,000 left the country, split fairly evenly between France and Israel. There's only approximately 1,000 Jews left in Tunisia, mostly in the island of Jerba, where the Jews there lead a very traditional lifestyle, and they have yearly pilgrimages from Tunisia and elsewhere in the North African world to the ancient synagogue of Griba. And here you see the festival and pilgrimage on the right. Algeria had 140,000 Jews. About half were in Algiers in the center, Oran in the west, and Constantine in the left. In 1830, the French invaded and conquered Algeria, and it became part of metropolitan France. Jews and Muslims at that time were classified as native. However, in 1870, thanks to the prime role of Adolphe Crinault, who was Minister of Justice and actually one of the founders of the AIU, the Crinault Decree in October 1870, Jews became French citizens. Muslims were not. The Jews became very Gallicized or Frenchified. There were actually, as you see here in the picture on the right, there were actually no AIU schools for general education. Jews went to French secular schools, but the AIU did have supplemental Jewish educational schools, like after school Talmud Torahs in the United States. Jews also, being French citizens, fought in World War I on the side of the French in Europe. There was a good deal of anti-Semitism in Algeria, especially French settlers who were called colons and pieds noirs. This took place especially from the 1890s as part of a reaction against Captain Dreyfus and his trial. However, Jews were a large proportion of the city elections, and they held a balance of power, which did seem to moderate things to an extent. However, in 1937 was the Constantine riots, which was a harbinger of things to come. 1934. 25 Jews were killed with both Muslim and European settler incitement. Like the other French possessions, Vichy regulations, the Statut des Juifs, occurred in October 1940. The Crinault decree was abrogated. Jews became natives again. There were quotas on jobs, education, and confiscation of property. The Jews responded by forming in a number of ways, including forming a network of private schools from dismissed teachers. In November 1942, Algiers were captured by the Americans and British. This was part of Operation Torch, where there were outlanders in Morocco and Algeria. On the right, you see José Abdelkader, who was a medical student from a distinguished family who helped the resistance secure Algiers for the Allies. And in fact, the Jews were a great majority of the resistance in Algeria. But then, starting in the 1950s, came the rise of Algerian nationalism. The FLN, the Front de Libération Nationale, had a war against the French from 1954 to 1962. The Jews were caught in the middle. In December 1960, the Great Synagogue in Algiers burned. In June 1961, there was the murder of Sheikh Raymond Leiris, a beloved Jewish oud player and singer who specialized in Andalusian music. Algerian independence was proclaimed July 3rd, 1962. France declared it would repatriate all French citizens, and between May and July 1962, there was a mass exodus of Jews to France. Only 5,000 went to Israel. Also, approximately 1 million French settlers went to France. On the right, you see a burial of a Geniza taking place in one of the desert settlements called Gadia in May of 1962. And it was emblematic of what took place in all of North Africa, Jews having to leave their homeland forever. Morocco had the most Jews of any Arab countries, 260,000, about 3% of the population. And where Jews live range from small villages, which had a Jewish quarter in the Atlas Mountains, as you see in the center. On the upper right was the Mellah of Fez, the Jewish quarter of Fez. The house on the left is the traditional home of Maimonides there. Below it, you see an aerial view of the tightly packed Mellah of Marrakesh in the center of the country. Most Jews lived in modest homes, but tucked away in the Mellahs were even a few affluent homes, as you see here. Morocco was the land of great contrast. Next. It was a land of revered rabbis, of pilgrimages to the tombs of Jewish saints on the anniversary of their deaths, called Halula. Jews were involved in commerce and handicrafts. Here you see weaving, a copper craftsman, a scribe, a textile merchant, and Jews were also mainly involved with traditional education. Only a minority had an AIU education. In fact, the earliest AIU school was in Tetuan in 1862 in the north of Spain. The Alliance Israelite Universal was in small towns, like here you see Ben Ahmed, and large cities on the right here in Casablanca. Besides education, they were involved in nutrition. Here there's a milk distribution. They also taught vocational education, and here you see women with typing practice. Next. Thanks to the AIU, a number of Jews became modernized and were able to get good jobs, and whole families would then move to the new European quarters in the cities. Here is Casablanca. And this was part of an overall trend. Jews would move from rural towns and villages to the large overcrowded mellas in the big cities, and if possible, they would move from the mellas to the European districts. The Jews had varied relations with the Muslim population, ranging from good to bad. Here is one of the bad. This was the Fez pogrom in 1912, where 45 Jews were killed. Again, like Algeria and Tunisia, the Vichy laws were applied in October 1940. This is Sultan Mohammed V, who disapproved of anti-Semitic laws, but he still was forced to sign them. They were called Dahirs. Morocco was the French protectorate from 1912, and the Sultan was legally the sovereign, but the actual ruler was the French resident general. Jews were never citizens in Morocco, unlike Algeria. Some Jews were sent, especially foreign Jews fleeing Europe, were sent to labor camps deep in the Sahara Desert to help build the Trans-Saharan Railroad. Also, in August 1941, the Jews who did live in the European area were sent back to the Mellas, and this was a great discomfort to these modernized Jews. Post-war from 1948 to 1951, about 53,000 Jews came to Israel. They were helped by a Jewish agency organization, Kedima, and they were assisted by the French. In 1951, Israel started a policy of selektia, which means low quotas and stringent screening. Israel at this time was overwhelmed by immigrants, and they felt that Morocco was still under French control, was relatively safe for the time being. However, as independence got closer in 1954 to 1956, and economically things improved in Israel, another 35,000 came to Israel. Not only the poor, which took place earlier in the decade, but also more middle-class Jews. In 1956, Morocco declared independence from France, and another 30,000 Jews left for Israel, but there were still 200,000 in the country. However, the resourceful Mossad established secret camps from 1956 to 1961. Moroccan officials turned a blind eye, as even though immigration had been banned in Israel in September of 1956. On the right, you see a boat. This was a boat similar to the Pisces, which in January 1961, named the Igaz, sank off the Mediterranean coast on their way to Gibraltar, and 45 Jews died. This was bad publicity for Morocco and their new king, Hassan II, and he decided to ease restrictions on immigrations. This led on lower left to Operation Yakin in 1961 to 1964, where an operation led by the Mossad, where 87,000 Jews left for Israel by plane or ship. And here you see Moroccan Jews arriving at Haifa and seeing Mount Carmel for the first time. Of course, the Jews had to pay the Israelis and American Jewish organization had to pay a secret ransom of approximately $50 million. After 1967, another 40,000 Jews left, mainly to France. In the 1970s and after, young Jews would leave the country for higher education and would not return. And now there is only 5,000 Jews or less concentrated in Casablanca. For many decades, this was a forgotten exodus. From 860,000 Jews, there's probably now 4,000 Jews in all of the Arab lands, and this number keeps on going down. Everybody knows of the Palestinian refugees, which were about 700,000. What did the Jews live besides their homelands? Their property was 5 times the size of the land of Israel, and it was worth at least $50 billion. These Jews integrated into French society. The majority of French Jews are from North Africa, and about 1/3 of Arab Jews went there. In Israel, their food and music is now prominent. They're involved in politics and the military. The intermarriage rate between Ashkenazi and Mizrahi or Sephardic Jews is approximately 25%. Even though there is still discrimination, it's getting less over time. Unlike most Palestinian refugees, which except for Jordan, have restrictions on their work and on their civil rights. But things are beginning to change. In 2008, the House of Representatives passed Resolution 185, saying that Jewish refugee compensation had to be involved in any settlement of the Arab-Israeli problem, along with the Palestinians. The Knesset passed a law in 2010 saying the same thing, although Israel was slow to push their case for various diplomatic reasons. In 2014, they named November 30th as the day of the year to commemorate the Jewish exodus from Arab lands. The Trump peace plan, which came out earlier this year, acknowledged Jewish as well as Palestinian refugees who were due for compensation. And early this year, the World Jewish Congress had an event at the UN with the Israeli ambassador Danny Danon to raise awareness of Jewish refugees from Arab countries at the UN. Finally, I misspoke on 2 occasions. Libya had 30,000 Jews, not 3,000, and in Egypt, 1,300 Jews, not 13,000, were incarcerated during the Israeli War of Independence. Also, I want to give profound thanks to Renee Feynman, who put the PowerPoint pictures together, and to Blake Lynette, who under trying circumstances where we never met, actually married my speaking to the pictures. So great thanks to both of them. Finally, although the great majority of those listening to this are probably Ashkenazi Jews, this Mizrahi or Sephardic story is also our story. We are one people. We do have a common religion, a common homeland. And I'd like to thank you all for listening, and I hope you picked up a little knowledge about the Jews from Arab lands and their exodus from their homeland. Thank you.